Hi there, and welcome to another exciting edition of Israel Explained. Today we're going to talk about the Qatari offer for a deal to end this war and release the hostages. This isn't a fully official offer yet, but it's enough to make the cabinet discuss it. Hamas is discussing it too. It's also built on the Egyptian offer to end the conflict made about 2 weeks ago that we've already discussed here. And while it's not going to be accepted by either side, it is showing alarming signs. And I say alarming because this is a terrible deal. It is showing alarming signs of becoming the guide for how this conflict ends, something that Israel needs to be very concerned about. So let's look first at what this offer says. So the main planks are a cessation of fighting um, immediately when this is adopted. Israel will have the hostages at most once released, those with the serious humanitarian concerns, illnesses, fear of sexual exploitation, pregnancy, those sorts of things. The first 50 that will be released. The other hostages will be released after that in stages, in a staggered manner, with key for how many prisoners are released, for how many hostages, which Hamas is going to try to make higher than the 3 per 1 that Israel achieved in the last deal. Israel will try to retain at 3.1. Of course, Israel will release Palestinian prisoners, and not just any Palestinian prisoners, the heaviest Palestinian prisoners, as we already discussed. Qatar has offered that Hamas leaders go into exile, something Hamas hasn't accepted, but is something that Israel wants. But Hamas has demanded that they remain in power in Gaza, and so Qatar is looking to have them be involved in governance in Gaza after the war. This is probably in line with that the coalition government talks between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority that we've been hearing about, which haven't reached fruition. But that's probably what Qatar is aiming for. The PA would be stronger, but Hamas would remain with part of the power. Now, the Israeli cabinet is talking about this tonight, but they're not going to adopt it, not even close. A senior Israeli official told Ynet, quote, "This is not a realistic agreement." And the reason Israel doesn't consider it a realistic agreement is um, the main one is that the Israeli goals for the war are not going to be achieved, not even close, if this deal is adopted. Um, Israel has vowed repeatedly to completely destroy Hamas military capabilities and governance in Gaza. This deal would keep both of those things intact, meaning that Israel would basically be surrendering and losing the war, especially since Hamas is also demanding that Israel withdraw completely all of its troops from the Gaza Strip and keep no security mechanism there at all. A second reason is that this takes a limited hostage deal off the table. In fact, just the offer almost does that. And what Israel would really want right now, since it feels that the military operation is not going the way that it would like to, uh, would be a release of partial hostage release while Israel recalibrates for the continuation of the operation. This takes that off the table and something that Israel is concerned about. Despite the fact that the government is going to reject this. This proposal is not going away. Israel's not going to send it back and say there's nothing to talk about. Israel will send it back saying there is something to talk about. And the reason for that is that there are at least two groups in the Israeli cabinet and government that have some interest in pursuing this track. One is what I would call the hostage first group, and they're led by Benny Gantz. Gantz, before the cabinet meeting, hinted at his interest by saying, quote, "The most important thing is the return of the hostages. It takes priority over any move in fighting," end quote. And Hostages and Missing Families Forum is, of course, on the same page. They said, quote, "The war cabinet must not concern itself with anything other than returning the abductees. We demand they approve any deal that will lead to their immediate release alive." The other camp that is somewhat interested in this is the pro-Lebanese camp, or I should say, the pro uh, concentrating on the Lebanese front camp. They think that because Hamas has been to some extent neutered, Hezbollah has not. Hezbollah is a stronger threat. Indeed, many military experts believe Hezbollah is the strongest terrorist organization in the world. Israel should turn its attention there. And the temporary deal with Hamas is what the doctor ordered from their perspective. So they're looking whether Israel can get a deal with Hamas that would be temporary. They could then break, get the hostages, attack in Lebanon, then go back to Gaza. Not clear if that is really something that Israel could do, especially if the U.S. puts its weight behind the deal, which it would have to in order to get it done. Halevi and Gallant seem to be increasingly Lebanon first. Halevi went to meet soldiers in Gaza and told them, quote, there is no part of Lebanon you can't dismantle, end quote, which is a questionable thing to say, but shows the increased interest that Halevi has in attacking Lebanon. So there are some people who would support a deal along not these lines, but in that direction. Those who are Hamas first um, in the government, which probably includes Netanyahu, includes Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, includes several others, they would be against advancing this at all. The problem is, even if Israel were to reject this altogether, the fact that this plan has surfaced is a serious problem for Israel. I've been warning for a while here that a vacuum is forming. Israel has not been able to articulate a day after plan that's even remotely practical or acceptable. Therefore, other parties who have reason to want to end this are stepping into that breach and offering things. And the fact that right now Qatar is the main element doing that is terrible for Israel because while Qatar is genuinely trying to end this conflict, it does not even remotely share Israeli interests. For Qatar, it's very good if Hamas comes out of this with more power rather than less because it allows them to continue to wield influence in the region. The kind of agreement that Israel wants, where Hamas is eliminated as a governing power in Gaza, is against Qatari interests. The truth is, Qatar shouldn't be involved in this at all. But because Israel isn't offering a clear, realistic day after plan, other actors are. Nature abhors a vacuum, and this vacuum is being filled in ways that are terrible for Israeli interests. And not only that, the way this negotiation is going, Hamas are clearly with the upper hand. They are making hardline demands, willing to occasionally cave a little bit on some of them, while Israel is passing all of its red lines. Hamas is demanding that Israel withdraw completely from Gaza. Hamas is demanding that it remain in power. And um, this means that Israel would be defeated if it's accepted because it's not clear that Israel has a plan for the day after, because Israel is no longer pursuing the war vigorously. Hamas is developing an upper hand in negotiations. That is a disaster for Israel. Israel is not initiating. It needs to change this equation by escalating and going into Rafah and offering a clear and practical day after deal that the United States and its allies can work with. The longer it hesitates on doing those two things, the more likely it is that some sort of peace deal that is terrible for Israeli interests will be forced on it. So while this is not a practical deal yet, the fact that it's shaping up is a terrible sign for Israel. The fact that it looks worse than what Egypt had offered 2 weeks ago is another terrible sign for Israel. The momentum of this war has to change. Okay, so let's answer some questions from viewers. JDB asks, under Israel's political system, would it be possible for the Likud party to remove Netanyahu from power without breaking up the government? If he's that unpopular, would that be a way the Likud could save itself via a snap election that might take it out of power completely? So the answer to your question is yes, that would be possible, and there's a lot of people in the Likud who are sitting and thinking exactly that. Right now, during the war, if the Likud did that, they would be considered traitors by the right wing and Likud supporters. But if this war is ended badly by Netanyahu, and that on unfortunately is seeming increasingly likely, he may not be able to survive that. And the Likud would much rather replace him from within the party than face an election where they would end up losing to Gantz. Of course, one of the main problems is the Likud doesn't know who they want to put up as the heir. There's three people who people have talked about: Yuli Edelstein, Israel Katz, Nir Barkat. None are very exciting, charismatic figures. It's unclear which of those anyone would solidify behind, and that's another thing stopping this from happening. But once Netanyahu's popularity dips below a certain point, and once there's an agreed upon successor, this may happen because it beats an election from their perspective, and the other right wing parties would probably support it for the same reason, because they would all get shellacked. Um, Fred asks, China's shipping giant Costco, not to be confused with Costco, where you get giant packages of food, was granted safe passage through the Red Sea by the Houthis, the only major shipping company to receive this right. Not long after, Costco cut all shipping to and from Israeli ports, basically making trade between Israel and China difficult, if not impossible. Does this signal Chinese support for the Houthis and by extension Hamas? If so, is there anything Israel or even the US can do to alter this policy? What economic impact do you see this having on Israel, if any? Okay, a lot to unpack there. Basically, two main issues. What's China's position? What's the economic effect on Israel? So, China's position is fairly neutral, at least officially. They're making deals with the Houthis because the Houthis are stopping shipping. They're not making deals with the Houthis because they support the pro-Iranian militias against Israel. China has basically stayed out of these sorts of things, thinking that too much involvement would be costly for their diplomatic efforts elsewhere, most notably in the Far East, where in the long term they want to roll back American power. If if China was forced to choose sides, they probably would choose the pro-Iranian side in the Middle East, but they try not to. I won't get into details, but I looked into this. Israel and China can continue to trade, and they will continue to trade. So I don't think it has much of an economic impact. But needless to say, the fact that the Houthis are able to cut off trade to Israel and countries like China are cooperating with it is a very bad sign for the future. Oh, I should also mention that a lot of Chinese arms were found in Gaza um, that Hamas had been using, but they were not likely sent by China directly. They were sent by North Korea. China may have known about it. Like I said, I think China leans against Israel here, but they're not fully involved. I don't think they're arming Hamas directly. I don't think they like the fact that the Houthis are cutting off international shipping. That's not good for their economic interests either. John Price asks, how likely is it to make northern, perhaps also central Gaza, into an equivalent of Area B if Rafah isn't taken and Hamas rest in power for the whole year? So, of course, what John's referring to here is Area B in the West Bank, which is the part of the West Bank that, according to the Oslo Accords, was under Israeli security authority. The Palestinian Authority had control there politically. Meanwhile, Area C is only Israeli authority, and Area A is only Palestinian authority, although the IDF does raid those areas quite regularly nowadays. So the Israeli vision, according to the Gallant plan, which has not been adopted by Israel, sees basically Gaza, all of Gaza, turning into an Area B, where there was some sort of independent Palestinian government, but the Israelis take full security control. As we can see, the deal that's shaping up from Qatar and Hamas's demands would have Israel withdraw completely. So it's actually an optimistic scenario at this point, considering how the war is going, that Israel will remain there in an Area B type solution. But that is definitely what Israel would like to have full and complete security control until it can be handed over through a long transition to someone else. John also asks, what's happening right now in the West Bank? I see a lot of videos of Palestinians armed to the teeth chanting against Israel. Are Fatah and the PA cooperating with Israel or with them? It seems both, and it's confusing. So, yeah, great question. The reason you're seeing the PA cooperating with both is the PA is desperately trying to survive. Right now, it's threatened from every single point and from every direction. Hamas is more popular than they are in the West Bank, but also its sponsors, Israel, the EU, the United States, are not sending it the money that it needs to survive because they're asking it to reform. So the PA is being squeezed from every direction. They don't have the capabilities to stand up to Hamas. They don't have the political popularity to stand up for Hamas. So they're basically allowing Hamas to do whatever it wants. None of that is because it wants to. It's better for the PA if it cracks down on Hamas But right now, it just doesn't have the capability or the political will to do any of that. So the PA isn't really cooperating with anyone. It's desperately in a defensive position. It knows that the longer it allows all this to go on, the less authority it has in the long term, but it absolutely can't act any other way. This is one of the reasons that, in my opinion, Israel needs to initiate, start talking about it. There's specific things that PA can do to reform so that a new partnership between Israel, Palestinian Authority, the United States can develop. Otherwise, just like I said with the post-war plan, there's a vacuum and Israel's enemies step into the vacuum. Israel needs to be more assertive on this front as well. Okay, so that's the end of Israel Explained for today. If you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon, on Shael Media. Link is at the bottom of this video. Also consider listening to my podcast, History of the Land of Israel. And tomorrow we will be here again, hopefully with some better news.